Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is a very special interview because, as you can tell, we're not live. And we're going to have a lot of fun today. My name is Jake Sussman. And for those of you tuning in now, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're tuning in. I highly encourage you to just please share where you're watching from. It's so great to look at our community and know that there's so many others out there that are like us, that are in the same position. So that, as of you may know, my name is Jake Sussman. I'm the founder of a company called Superpower Consulting, and I'm a dyslexia and ADHD influencer, where since quarantine started, I have been interviewing many different people, from parents, industry leaders, to doctors, to business leaders, and also people like you and I, who all have at least one thing in common. That is that, well, we're in this space or we have a learning and attention challenge. Now, last Thursday, I interviewed Sanja Binks, who's the CEO of the International Dyslexia Association. And today, I have a very, very special guest, Fumiko Hoeft, who is a leading neuroscientist. She's been conducting research on reading and dyslexia over the past 16 years. Hoeft went to medical school and also did a PH.D. in neuroscience. She conducts brain research on how children learn, in particular to reading, how the brains of dyslexics work, and the importance of how you feel and interact with the world when learning. She is a physician and neuroscientist at UConn, UCSF, and Haskins Global Literacy Hub, affiliated with Yale and UConn, and directs a brain imaging center. So cool. She's published over 160 articles and reviews and book chapters, and has delivered over 250 keynotes, talks, and workshops at venues such as local schools, international conferences, TEDx, and the White House. Whoa. Her work has been widely covered in media such as the New York Times, NPR, CNN, The New Yorker, and Scientific American. Wow. That's serious, Fumiko. So really welcome. I'm really excited for you to join us. Now, let's just jump into this. How did you come to be a leading neuroscientist? Where did this all start?
I usually don't get asked this question with the phrase leading neuroscientist, so that's such an honor. Thank you. And I must say that you're probably the first person who didn't ask for. Maybe you did in the long past, in the distant past, but without asking my last name to say it correctly. So I was very, very impressed and surprised. But
I did my research.
Yes, you did. It's impressed. I'm impressed. So let's see. It's interesting because often people want to be a scientist and love research, and they are often from childhood. When you interview these people, they always wanted to be one. And I never had the interest of being a researcher. I was just, I wanted to be a physician, and I wanted to be a clinician. I wanted to be in a third world country and help the underserved population. So that was my primary kind of interest or career goal, even from a young age. And as I was telling you earlier, do you want to see my little blurb that I wrote?
I do, please.
So I'm going to try to share it with you, since I just gave a talk to some scholarship program that is underrepresented in health sciences, and trying to encourage and talk about your career plan. So I just happen to have this in front of me.
I love surprises.
Yes, I have some surprises, more probably, hopefully. Let me see, share screen. All right, so can you see?
Loud and clear.
All right, great. So this strip over here, written in Japanese, maybe you will surprise me and tell me that you can read Japanese as well. But if you do, you'll notice my really poor handwriting, and it still continues to this day. And I say that it runs in my family, so I can't blame my kids either, or my parents. But so this is my elementary school graduation book, and my dream that I write here, what you want to be when you grow up, was I want to be a physician and help the poor. So that's always what I wanted to do. I didn't think research was necessary. I thought it was necessary, but it was for someone else. And I wanted to be in the field and do what was needed to help people and feel that I was really immersed in that environment. And this is who I was inspired by, Mother Teresa. And I didn't have the honor to meet her, but we overlapped before she passed away. I was born a long time ago. So But, and then I got into research. I might have another one. Let me see. Right. So I
Wow,
wanted to
what
do
is
this.
this?
I'm going to deviate from your original question for a little bit. So
I
I
like
wanted to
that.
go. So instead of doing research, because I was totally not interested in, my friends were doing genetic and molecular and other kinds of research. In medical school, I did my thesis on tropical medicine and how nonprofits are effective or not effective in third world countries and how you can be more effective. So just dropping money or equipment, those things are not effective, and how you can really, and so that was my thesis topic, completely not really research-based and scientific. And then I was an ER doc for a while. This is kind of some article from the medical school magazine from a long time ago that I scanned in when I was 25. And so I was on that track for doing all clinical work and ER. And then suddenly I got into psychiatry rotation. I did my psychiatry rotation, and then I got really fascinated by the brain, so I became a psychiatrist. I was a psychiatrist for about 3 years. This is so timely, this interview, because I just made these slides 2 days ago and pulled out these photos. And
you know what? It all adds up, you know?
Perfect timing. So then I was disillusioned by the lack of evidence-based practice back then and how we were going by experience, and senior people were saying, I've done this 20 years and you can max out the dosage of medication by this and that. And I thought it wasn't very aligned with evidence. And so I became a scientist. So that's kind of a little bit of my background. It was a perfect question that I just happened to have prepared for.
Wow.
So I wasn't originally interested in research, and then I just, out of necessity and curiosity, I came to the United States for a year, and then I stayed I'm still here 20 years later.
Wow. 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 That's remarkable. Now, I'm just so curious. So when you were in elementary school with your dream to help the poor, where did that dream stem from?
I don't know. That's a very good question. I think it's hard to tell. I can't really point to any particular book. I think it's a series of things, for example, from my siblings going to the hospital, not anything serious, just even general kind of checkup and doing other things. And I felt like it was it must be such a rewarding job. And I always feel like I had that kind of, I think it's in my personality. My grandmother runs a church, and she would always have people living with her who,
Right.
in Japan, who needed a shelter and wanted a job. And so she dedicated her life to it. And I feel like that sort of runs in my family. And I feel like that's very rewarding for me. People find rewards in different ways, and that happens to be works for me.
Wow. Wow. Okay. I mean, in conversation of your childhood, I would love to just go back for a minute to your childhood, little Fumiko. What was it like in school for you, and what was your biggest challenge in school as a child, and how did you overcome it?
Let's see. So the most probably different or notable fact is that I moved around a lot as a child, and maybe not as much as some people, but I probably had three elementary schools. So every couple of years we were moving around. I never felt like I was at one place more than 2 years or one school. So constantly I felt like I was forced to make friends or start out all over, or prove yourself. And it wasn't just within the country. I grew up in Japan. Came to the United States. Then I went back to Japan as soon as I felt comfortable in the US culture and learned English. I went back to Japan and had to do it all over. I didn't know some of the derogatory or kind of swear words that other people might say or make fun of me. It was interesting. My parents would often tell me in Japan, when someone would say something, they said, you're supposed to get mad at this word because it's meant to be not a great, nice word. And then I would learn. And the same thing would happen in every culture I would move to. In the States, I remember when I was 3 to 7, I lived in the States, and then I would come home, and it was back a long time ago in the 70s. It's such a long time ago. But there's this phrase that I really remember that I would be singing along with friends that was meant not to be nice for Asian people. I still remember this. I think maybe you might know, or maybe some people might know, or maybe it's kind of dead already, but it was something like, Chinese, Japanese, Jordanese, look at these.
Oh my goodness.
Do you know this one?
I don't, but that is, I've heard of something, I've heard of that before though. I mean, it's.
So my parents grew up as an adult in that sort of culture in the United States. But I was a child, I wasn't aware of these stereotype and biases as much. And so I was doing it myself with other friends, just kind of like a fun song that I learned at school from friends. But just to make the point that I had to move around from cultures and different languages. So I felt like I was learning a new language. I had to learn to read, I had to learn to write, communicate in different languages back and forth and forget and then go to another country. So I felt like my challenge was how to make friends and kind of immerse yourself in the culture, learn the language. I always felt like I never had a formal diagnosis of dyslexia. And if I say this, some people say, yo, you just want to be a dyslexia wannabe. So I want to be careful about what I say, but I just felt like I had to learn how to read. And I felt like I was constantly slow. I didn't know the words. And I just had to work really hard to keep up with friends in every culture every couple of years. So that was my challenge growing up.
No, I get it. So, yeah, I mean, I think something, you know, as I hear you saying that, I can only reflect to my own life also, and this idea of change and you know, having to overcome certain obstacles in school. And, you know, for you, I can only imagine being in different places, not having that consistency. Was that challenging socially?
It was, and I think people probably react in different ways. Some people might become a kind of a clown type figure in the class, perhaps, and I was more of the quiet type. I'm always happy to help people, but I'm not the me, I want to do this sort of person. So I think I don't know. It's hard to do. It's hard to do a randomized control trial on yourself because you can't be in 10 different places and 10 different cultures and see how it would have been like if I were in a different situation. But I don't know. I feel like I'm probably more quiet than what I may have been. And I'm probably more accommodating. Some people might think I may not have strong opinions, perhaps, but that might have been a sort of a defensive mechanism of trying to feel what it's like and test the water and kind of mix in without looking too different.
But what I think is fascinating, what you said, was that what you're doing now wasn't what you originally wanted or thought, right? And how your experiences led you and shaped you to being where you are today is pretty remarkable. I mean, that journey must not have been easy, has it?
Yeah, that is true. And then I think, but part of me also is that I'm oblivious and I don't really notice certain things. And sometimes when people, for example, when I was a child and people would make fun of my accent or some other things that I wouldn't notice as much as some other kids might. I'm sensitive and I'm very hypersensitive in many ways, and people say I'm too sensitive. But on the other hand, I think there was some aspect of me like that, and it's hard to pinpoint to what makes me sensitive sometimes and not, but I feel like that also did help. And I don't know if that's what's a conscious or subconscious choice, but so that was helpful, but it was challenging. I always do feel like I felt like I had to work harder, I had to sleep less and to keep up and because people think I went to med school and I did decently well and people think that but you still did okay, so it's fine. But I felt like I slept probably half the amount of time that other people did. I went to class at 7 a.m. to learn from this chemistry teacher because I missed 2 years of chemistry when I wanted to apply in high school because I was switching countries and wanted to realize I wanted to apply to med school and I needed that education. And luckily there was that teacher who was willing to come into class early and help me. So I think I was fortunate also, but it was challenging.
Do you remember that teacher's name?
Ooh. No, I'm horrible with names and I'm going to embarrass myself. I don't remember.
That's okay. I think that sometimes just for me, remembering names, it is the worst. I can't, if I meet someone for the first time, it's so embarrassing. Also, I'll forget their name immediately. And I've always been fascinated with that myself, with why do I'm so interested in what they're saying, but I also forget their name, which is the most important thing to know, right?
And I remember the situation and the desk and how it felt like and how everything else, but what he was wearing and everything else except for the name.
If you're watching this and if you also forget names, you're bad at names, please let me know, because Fumiko and I feel like it's tough.
We need a club for this.
Oh yes, yeah. So I guess with that being said, I'm so curious because the parents in our community watching this, our kids are really going through a lot of challenges, and also a lot of new. What was the closest you've ever come to failure?
Let's see. So I think, so switching cultures we talked about and the hard experience behind it. Besides that, I think my biggest failure or the hardest experience for me was my social phobia and public speaking, which is what I'm sort of doing now, but it's a one-on-one conversation, which is much better. Yeah. So I think I would say public speaking and social phobia and how that impacted me throughout childhood and probably even adulthood. There's some people who are amazing speakers and communicators. I'm very, very envious and I always want to learn. So I always raise my hand to take the challenge and have more opportunities. And this is why I give talks, and I often don't say no to all these opportunities, but I know it's another occasion for me to embarrass myself potentially also, but we have to keep on trying.
Yeah, it's this idea of just putting ourselves out there. And I think as we're, I've been reflecting a lot on 2020 and the coronavirus. Oh my goodness, I cannot talk today. It's Friday. Hello. COVID-19, excuse me. How I'm seeing, and I'm curious what you think of this thought, but schools and how we're measuring children, as we're measuring kids based on a certain world, right? So if you get an A, that means perfect. That means that's where you should be striving to, is perfection, right? But what COVID-19 has taught all of us is that any memorization on an exam could not have prepared us for this, right? We didn't see this thing coming. And you can, last year before that, I mean, you can go into it, I guess, but like the idea is that not even an exam could prepare us for an uncertain world. And I think that as we're seeing this, as we're seeing adaptability happen in front of us right now as a society, right, we have an opportunity to look at and reflect on how are we measuring our kids to be ready for another change that disrupts our everyday life, right? So navigating uncertainty, I think, is so important. Like, for example, speaking in front of an audience, right? Of where you don't know what could happen if you say something, right? And you put yourself out there to potentially embarrass yourself, but by putting yourself out there, maybe, right? That's like a form of self-advocacy also, like maybe raising your hand in class or going up to a teacher when, you may need some help. So I don't know. I was just thinking about this the other day and I was like, that's actually kind of interesting. Like this idea between navigating a certain world versus an uncertain world, and how are we preparing our kids to navigate the uncertainty? So.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I want to show you later, just speaking of public speaking and speaking of photos that I just happen to have, but I have some, if you have some time about my proof of social phobia. I'm bad at public speaking.
I'm ready to go into that.
You're ready? Okay.
Yeah,
so I will show you another photo since I have it from this 2 days ago that I gave a talk on. So this is me when I was in high school, just graduating from high school. My first job at McDonald's, this was in England. And I signed up, not definitely for this uniform. It's not very fancy, as you can tell, and I think it's much fancier now probably, but I still want to take a job for the uniform. But so this is at McDonald's working or about to head out to McDonald's. And part of the reason was I really wanted to overcome my social phobia. And then it's not a public speaking job, but that was closest to communicating with people that you don't know that I could think of. And so I applied for the job, and I was hoping to get the cashier job, but I got the job polishing brass railings first. And so I started by polishing brass railings, and then gradually, because I got my high school diploma and I guess I could, and they promoted me sort of to the cashier, and I was very excited. I got yelled at a lot, but nonetheless, I got the job. I was very excited, and then I ended there. So this is my one of my first attempts to overcome social phobia. And then I have a recent photo. I just wanted to share this with you because it's a lot of people
I want to see.
like this. This is me giving a talk a year ago at Oracle Park for one of the EdRev events. But so this is just nothing special. I'm just giving a talk. Sometimes my kids want to come along and they come along. My younger one doesn't come along too much, but he really wanted to come along, or I made him to come along, I guess, on this one. And then he said that he wanted to take notes and write something and he's in the front row while we're waiting for other people to fill the room. It was a room full of people. It wasn't sparse like this, but at the beginning.
Yeah. I believe you. I see the people.
So, and then Kaito said he wanted to take notes, and I was very excited and happy because he doesn't like to read and write, and we have a single income kind of person helping him, and at the time, and he's reading and writing, and it takes hours to get him to do this. So I was almost in tears, and I said, okay, I'll give you a paper and pencil, so just write whatever you want to. And he said he's going to give me feedback. So at the end of the talk, I said, how do you know how to give feedback? And he said, I know how to do these things. So this is when he was in first grade or so, second grade perhaps. And then so this is what he wrote. At the end of my talk, he gave me this notepad. It says, you drone too much, you were too quiet, said too much, and didn't use hand signs, gestures, I think that's what he meant. And you sounded bored with only a hint of enthusiasm. I thought I did great. I thought I had great feedback. People looked engaged. I was excited to be there, but this is what he gave to me after the end. So that's my end to the current state of my public speaking.
Wait, can you leave that up for a sec? Don't
Yes,
put that away. I mean, just if you don't mind, this is what you just said about how your son doesn't typically like reading and writing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And here he volunteered to take notes, right? Is that to me is like, that's what it's all about, right? Perhaps it's less about the cookie cutter to the books way of teaching someone how to read or write. Perhaps it's, in his case, he needed a job. He wanted a job. He wanted to feel important and part of something. And that was enough for him to want to volunteer to write. So perhaps, is it that our kids can't write or can't read? Or is it that we have to overcome that obstacle and find the thing that triggers them to want to read or write?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's true. I mean, in other occasions as well, you see children who don't like to read or write. And then if there's something that they really want or motivated, if it's something about scary stories and writing fairy tales or making up stories he loves to do, and he can do, and he'll be motivated to write pages and pages if it's something advocating for himself that he wants. And so it's absolutely true.
Yeah. And this was great. Thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, I think there's finding that trigger, that spark for our kids and for our parents watching. This is so important. This is something that we do in our mentorship program, is that we try to find that strength, that thing that gets them excited to want to be open to learning, to want to be open to reading. I learned how to read by reading my model train books, not by reading the books I was reading in third grade or fourth grade. Thomas the Tank Engine taught me how to read, and that was the thing that got me excited. And that's what, that was it. That was it for me. And that was an outlet. That was my interest. So, your son here just wanted so badly to help you, wanted to get involved. And now, boom, he's writing. That's so great.
I think really, I told you a while ago. He loves trains also, when we were talking about trains, and he has a picture. I have a photo of him covered. He was 3 years old or so, but his bed is covered with Thomas the Train Engine books that he wanted to read that night. It was just full. So there's like 20 or 30 books all about trains on his bed. And I have a photo of that. So I'll share I don't have that with me right now, but I have to share that with you.
Please share that. I remember that. So when I was in 6th grade, it was really the lowest moment of my life. I was 3 grade levels behind in reading, forced to read out loud in class in front of everybody. I had trouble sleeping. I was paranoid. I had anxiety. It was awful. I developed tics, and whenever I would read, I had this severe, sharp pain, physical reaction, pain in my stomach. And I found myself falling asleep to two videos. One was just this train documentary of like the Colorado Rockies. And the other one was the Backstreet Boys concert. I don't know why, but for some reason, the Backstreet Boys put me to sleep. But the point is that trains and my parents were able to find the thing that got me really excited. And that was my outlet, right? The activity that helps us express to feel in control. And it gave me peace and serenity. And I just think it's so important for our kids to find those interests and to become aware consciously that they need these activities in order to feel in control.
Yeah, absolutely. I talked to Jack Horner, you might know him, the other day. We're on panels sometimes together, and he often talks about his passion for fossils and digging those out, and how that was the place for him to be in science, and how he would flunk in science classes, but then he would win every single science fair because he was just fascinated by science and rockets and fossils. And
so cool.
Yeah.
It's so cool. So I have this another question for you. What is we're going to jump to today now. Okay. What is the biggest area you are interested in right now? What are some of the things that you're researching?
Let's see. So we have a number of different research programs going on, and I can put it into a couple different buckets, maybe three big buckets.
Sure.
One is more on the kind of the basic research, what's considered as basic research. So we are looking at, for example, what's nature and what's nurture and how they interact.
Ooh, nice. Okay.
So you might have the eye color of your parents, and you might have the stubbornness of your mom, but it might be because you saw your mom being stubborn, or that was a reaction to the environment around you. And so it's really hard to disentangle sometimes what's nature versus nurture. A lot of researchers now don't like to say nature versus nurture and nurture and how they interact, because nature, genes can impact how we behave, right? Because we have our genetic makeup that makes us, gives us our personality and other things. But then you can, environment or your behavior can impact other people's, how they behave, or the environment around you. So you think that environment, so for example, if you have the environment around you that, for example, you had no books growing up, then you might become a poor reader because you were not exposed to that environment. And people will often say, oh, that's environment, but it's not that simple, because the reason why you might not have books at home could be because your parents were not great readers. I mean, it could be the environment that they didn't have money, but it could be because they didn't like reading and they just didn't care about books as much. And so that's why they don't have books at home. They don't do shared book reading at home. So it might be the parents' gene that impacts the environment that impacts the child, and not directly that I gave you my genes and I don't like reading, so you're not going to like reading. It's not that simple. It could be this impact. Also, it could be something like what my son does all the time, which is he's very charming. He loves telling stories, and then he would talk his brother into reading to him. So he doesn't like to read, and that might be some genetic and other kind of predispositions, but then he makes the world change to his advantage so that he doesn't have to read more, so he doesn't get more practice. Does that make sense? So it's like a two-way street, and it's not simple. It's not one is genetic and one is environment. It's the interaction between these different two-highway streets or two-way streets.
So what just so I understand, are you saying that genetics may or may not impact our ability to learn?
It does definitely impact, but it might not be as simple in directly saying, I'm going to pass on half my genes to my children, so they have half the chance of becoming a poor learner if I'm a poor learner. It's not that simple. That it might be because I change the environment that changes the child. And so there's all these different kinds of arrows going on between nature and nurture. I guess that's kind of what I'm trying to say. But so that's kind of one thing that we're looking at, and we're very interested in. We came up with new theories of dyslexia, like the neuronoise hypothesis of dyslexia a couple of years ago. It's more biological theories, taking in animal research and other kind of fields and integrate it together. So we're trying to test some of those in children with and without poor reading. We are looking at things like creating a growth chart for brain networks. So when you go to a pediatrician's office, you might get a gross chart for height and gross chart for weight. And you might say, oh, my baby's 90th percentile. Oh, my child is too skinny. He needs to get fatter, or some other things. And so what we're trying to do is create these kind of gross charts, but not for these heights and weights, but for brain networks, and seeing if we can map it and see how it might be different depending on if you have ADHD or dyslexia and so on.
Huh, that's so they don't have that right now.
They do not have that. It's really hard to standardize, and we're just now having enough big data sets from different groups contributing. So we're now people are now getting into more of these things over the past several years. So that's kind of the first bucket of basic research. And then we have some of these translational kind of research, which is that may have more relevance to everyday life, which is, for example, we might be looking at children who are learning multiple languages. So you might be a Spanish speaker learning English, or English speaker and going to a Spanish immersion program. And we want to see how that impacts your brain and how it impacts behavior. There's a lot of people who talks about the bilingual advantage and how your executive function and cognitive flexibility and these things might be better if you're bilingual. And there's a lot of people who say no. And so we're trying to look at that from one angle of looking at 0 to 5 sort of multilingual experience. And then when you go to a school, that's an immersion or multilingual program, and see how that might impact brain and behavior. So that's kind of one thing. We want to learn how to identify kids early so that we can prevent learning failures. We want to learn how children, if they have dyslexia or ADHD or learning differences, how they can learn to compensate and overcome. So we're trying to look at kind of ways that we can study individually what kind of profiles they might have, so that we can apply it to children who want to learn to compensate and overcome it. So those are some of the translational projects. And then we have very applied projects like developing apps and developing tools, and dyslexia screener, social emotional toolkit, and so on. So we have different buckets of things.
Wow. Gosh, I have so many just different questions about this, because we're talking about innovation. We're talking about how we can better reach our kids. And I know you tapped on social emotional. That's something that I'm very passionate about, especially as we go about, trying to identify what motivates willingness to learn, right? Because we can teach someone how to read all we want, but if not open to learning it in the first place due to, other factors, right? Then is that work going to be as beneficial? Right? I see it as like a destination. There's like a whole process journey of getting to willingness to learn in the first place, because we're born knowing how to learn. It's just like, somewhere along the way, we're told that we can't. And then all of a sudden, boom, we have all of our barriers up. And that's the thing I find personally so fascinating. And, with what you're doing with dyslexia research, it's so important, not just dyslexia research, but, just neurodiversity in general, like ADHD, and trying to understand how our brains work, because they are so unique, and all of our minds are different. So the question is, how can we better understand that? So for our parents watching here, what would you say are some tips for them to keep their eyes open? Because a lot of parents may be either just discovering that their kids have a learning and attention challenge, or may be in it right now, and they may be in a situation of where the path seems really foggy. Their child's path may seem very foggy. So what could be some tips for our parents, either resources or just ways that they can either get involved with what you're doing?
Let's see, that's, I think my number one advice to start with is that, just based on scientific evidence, early identification and early intervention, or providing early help, is very important. Every year that you are not receiving evidence-based interventions or support, it does reduce the effectiveness by 25 to 50%. So for example, if you could get help in kindergarten, you're not sure if it's true, you don't want to believe it, or you don't know how to, or you get on the wait list, you think it's not urgent until 2nd, 3rd grade. But if you know that there is some risk that they might be a poor reader or poor attention, other issues, then I would say get on the wait list and try, even though you're not sure, because often these kind of services take a long time. It takes, some people have 2 years of wait list if you want to be seen by a certain particular person. And if you go sequentially, trying to get help from the schools, waiting, then you figured out that you can't get help from the schools, then you have to get outside assessment. That takes another half a year or so. And then you might wait 2 years to get a right person. And so it's such a process. And we kind of jumped the gun. And before we got the assessment results and we started kind of doing something, because I just knew the scientific evidence that if you wait for a year, it diminishes the effect every year. 25 to 50%. It starts in kindergarten or there's results. So, so that's kind of one thing. And even though some people worry about the label and some people worry about other, there's a lot of concerns, and I completely get it. And, you know, we all go through this, and I've gone through this myself, but I think in general, the science says that knowing is better and understanding is a strength. So, and that applies to us, that more knowledge that we know about how our children are is going to be helpful, but it's also for children as well. The children I think has the right to know in their own way, and not in a way that stigmatizes or labels people. But I think that they understand so they can use it. My son, for example, younger son, says, I think I had a tiny bit of dyslexia, but my parents and the teachers kind of helped me so that it's just tiny. And that's how he kind of digests it and feels like he has overcome a lot of the pieces. And I think that's good for him, that he knows those labels and how to link them so that he can understand. I think there's nothing more frightening when the child doesn't know. They know that they're very sensitive, so they know that there's something wrong. They think that they're the dumbest kid, or they think that there's something wrong with them. I remember my youngest son coming home, and he was in pre-K, saying that before we had done assessment and other things, that he thought he was the dumbest kid in the class. And it was a very supportive environment, but he would come home crying because all he had to do is look over the shoulders of other kids and know they're moving forward with their letters and other things. And he was completely confused. And so you don't really need the label in a way, and so the children know. So the sooner and the more you can communicate with your children, I think that's very, very important. And
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, but that's kind of one aspect. There's a lot of things, but I think that's one aspect. I think that's very, very important to move. I don't want to I don't want to scare people, but I think knowing and moving faster is always kind of more helpful. And sharing with your children, I think, is always very helpful for social emotional abilities, because it starts early. If we didn't do that, maybe by now, if he's started 4th grade, but the social emotional would have been motivation and confidence would have been very, very different.
Right. And talking about the label really quickly here, do you think that the label, like getting labeled, now there's one thing to have to embrace the label, you can't ignore it, obviously, right? But to let it define you in the sense of where it can actually hold you back. I found with my, one of my labels about the way I was learning two things. One was the fact that I will always struggle with communication skills, ironically, and math, which is not so ironic, because I actually ended up telling myself that because of my learning disability, it's just not my strength. I never actually learned it the way that I should have at this point. And do you believe that that label can hold kids back themselves?
Yeah, so I think it's part of that package. I think it's really important to communicate other aspects as well. And so I think, labeling is not good. And there is research that says that if you label it, then you become that label. So it's really not good. So if someone tells me you're a stubborn person, then you become more stubborn. And I think there's evidence to support that in many different ways. And so I think, and they would feel very handcuffed and don't feel like they can succeed, for example. So it's very, very important to show in tandem that what the issues are, but also then how with effort that you can change. And I want to be mindful of people, people talk about growth mindset. And if you dig a little bit into the research, there's a lot of controversies about growth mindset, how you can change it, whether it's useful, same for grit and other things. But I really do fundamentally believe that some of it is talent, some of it is talent, a lot of it is effort, and a lot of it is perseverance and how you persist and how much you love that thing. I don't think I'm particularly talented in research, but I think I love doing it. I have curiosity and I have passion because I have a mission and I have a goal, and that kind of keeps me up at night. And that's my and so I think it's important to kind of convey those messages at the same time, that you but you also need to believe, and you can be anything that you believe in, or anything. I mean, I don't want to use the word anything or everything, but the things that you can believe, you believe in.
Absolutely. I think that there's so much to that, because I think kids today, what we're seeing with our mentoring program, we work with over 40 kids around the world from 7 to 23 years old, all with dyslexia and ADHD. And I would say 90% of them, when they first meet their mentor, they believe that this person is either here to fix them or help them with their homework. And they're turned off. There is a barrier up. They're like, no, I'm not doing it. And I'm looking at this and I'm saying, wow, this is actually kind of fascinating, because our youth, our kids are they believe that they're broken and they don't want to feel broken. They think a professional means I'm here to fix you. Mm-hmm. And what if that's not the case? Like, what if we can actually reach our kids in a way that's about the relationship, that's about entering their world? You know what I'm saying? Because once we enter their world, then we may be able to find something remarkable about them that we may not be seeing because we're so focused on the surface behavior. Mm-hmm. You know, so I think that it's super important what you're talking about. I have 3 more questions for you. Is that okay? Mm-hmm. How you doing? You doing all right?
No.
Awesome. Okay. So right now, we are in battles between science and schools and politicians. Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness. Not to get in too much detail, but so my question for you is, why is it so important to follow the science, and how can parents arm themselves with research-backed information to share with schools?
Yeah, so sorry, I'm trying to think of the question again. So the question is, why is science important?
Yeah. Why is it important to follow the science? Let's just start with that.
Yeah. So sorry, I can't keep multi-step instructions.
No, that's okay. No, it's okay. It's okay. That's why we're all here.
Children. So why is science important to follow? I think the most tangible one, and I'd like to think I'm very practical, and so I think the most tangible reason that we want to follow the science of reading is because it helps us, right? So knowing that, for example, we just talked about, if you wait and fail for a year, every year that you wait and don't get evidence-based instructions, the effectiveness goes down by 25 to 50%. So that's kind of one thing, which means that then you would know that you have to do something early, instead of saying, let's wait until 3rd grade, until he reads and until he or she is, we can assess her adequately, because we don't want to mislabel them, or we don't want to have a jump the gun, or we don't want to have a false alarm. But that also tells you that maybe it's okay if it's low cost to the child and families and schools, and if we have, because it's usually that much shorter programs is going to be effective when you're younger. And then you need to do a 2-hour intervention every day if you wait until 5th grade, for example, whereas 20 minutes 3 times a week might be effective if you start in kindergarten. So I think knowing is practically useful for those reasons. And I think, I mean, for a scientist, of course, knowing and understanding their brain is just on its own. It's a beautiful thing, of course, but I think that there's a lot of practical and not just that piece, but other aspects as well. Mentoring, it's better if you get mentored by a peer and someone that's close to you in terms of a label or a diagnosis, and how they act and how they look, because that's going to have a much more impact and getting through to the child. And those are all kind of scientific evidence, and there's more kind of details of it, like decoding is important for and the science of reading and all those kind of wars that are going around and all those aspects, but these are just kind of simpler examples.
Right, that's so helpful. Thank you so much for that. And for our parents and our folks watching, you know, if you have any questions for myself or Fumiko, please feel free to just ask away. I'm going to be watching this. I know I'm kind of talking to the future here, but I'm going to be watching this, so I'll be with you at 8 o'clock. And okay, we got my last 2 questions for you. Ready?
Okay. Yes.
Question 1 is, what motivates you in the morning?
What motivates me in the morning? So as much as I talked about my public speaking and fear for and social phobia and so on, I love communicating with people. I love communication. I love hearing other people. So that's kind of one thing. And whenever I get to communicate and feel that some of our work had in some shape or form, impact on people, that really gets me going. So having these kind of communications, and ideally this would be live, but when you have communications in person and someone says, I had some person come up to me or family come up to me and said after a panel saying that my child has dyslexia and he was really struggling. He has suicidal ideation. And we finally, with the school district, suing the school district or whatever happened, they were able to get this person into an LD school and get the support he wanted and support from the peers and feel like he belongs somewhere. And the family really thanked me for the work that I did and how that really impacted and changed the way they felt on the teachers in this district and so on. And that really put me in tears. And so these—
I'm getting emotional hearing that. That's amazing.
It really does make me tearful and tearful, but hearing those things once a year or once in a while, and it doesn't have to be my research, but the collective effort that we all put in, whether it's mentoring, whether it's research, we all play a role in here. And that, just thinking about it always makes me wake up in the morning, but also makes me tearful as well.
Yeah, it's so, you are an incredible human being. I just want to say what you're doing for our community, for the next generation, and the next generation after that. You know, your hard work is, you know, just, it's being seen, and it's starting from the beginning of your journey. You know how that dream of wanting to help people really kind of that led you down this journey to now helping people all over the world, you know, by what you're finding, by your research. And you are yourself a superhero, you know, and I really thank you for your time and for your work. And that leads to my final question here is, and I love asking this question, and it's my favorite one of all, but speaking of superheroes, what is your superpower? Is your superpower? And I'll give you some time to think about that if you want.
Yes. No, I'd love to hear what other people have said in the past when you have spoken to people, but I'll start with one and then you can tell me what other people have said in the past, because I'm very, very curious. I would say it's, I would say going with little sleep or having kind of random sleep schedules. And that has helped me go through my residency. That has helped me kind of stay and keep up with other kind of peers and feeling like you had to work harder to keep up. And I think for me, that was the only solution. If you read slower, if you understand slower, if you write slower because it's a foreign language or dyslexia or whatever it might be, then you just have to get your hours from somewhere. And I know how important sleep is in research, and people talk about this all the time, and people send me articles all the time. But I think that's kind of one thing that I have done. But
wow, that's a superpower. That's a definite superpower for sure. Yeah, people have said some very different things, surprising things. I know that Sanja Banks, she said, she's the CEO of the International Dyslexia Association. She said that her superpower is being an innovator. We have some people who have said their superpowers have been actually, funny enough, sleeping, like being the sleeper, but also the lack of sleep. So you're the second person that said that.
I have another one I want to add later, but go ahead.
Yeah. There's definitely not one superpower for sure. We all have that. And that's the reason why I asked that question is this idea of superpowers, you know, it's kind of controversial in this because they're like, well, superpowers, dyslexia, superpower, that whole thing, right? I have this take on superheroes where we have the story of Superman, who's my favorite superhero. And I believe that, you know, it's the only genre, first of all, that a child and an adult can watch and both get something out of it. And you have someone like Clark Kent, who is Superman, who when he was a boy, he just wanted to fit in like everyone else, but he was different. And he was, you know, he had these unique little abilities, but he didn't really understand them. And when he got a little bit older, his abilities started to show and he became isolated. His peers did not understand him, so he was bullied. He felt alone and didn't really know who to talk to, and he was scared. And you know, he didn't know how to communicate to his parents what was going on. And then he kind of went down this whole path of self-discovery where, I don't know if you've seen Superman, but that Arctic cave, you know, where Clark Kent speaks to his father, because he was rejecting his strengths, his abilities, his whole life, until he met with the ghost of his father. And that was the moment when he embraced himself, his past, and who he is. And that was the turning point where he became Superman. And every moment after that, he kept pushing himself, jumping higher, flying farther and farther, to the point where even when the world wanted to reject him, he still went out to save the world. And until he saved the world, that's when the world finally embraced him. So if you've never seen Superman, I completely ruined it for you. It's a great movie. You should watch it anyway. But like, you know, you hear all these stories, Fumiko, of people that are either, you know, have found any form of success, but how to overcome adversity in their life. And they were the little they were the little Clark Kents, you know what I'm saying, that were misunderstood, that were labeled, that didn't understand themselves. And at some point along their journey had to embrace who they are. And by doing that, that's when they found their superpower, whatever that is. And all of us as human beings, we all may have a brain, I like to hope, but none of us have the same mind, which means that we all have something unique. And I find that personally so fascinating. So I love that question because it just gives me cool insight and perspective to just people's superpowers, I guess. So if you have another one, I'd love if you wanted to share another one.
Right. Yes. Okay. One thing I like to ask people if what they think about it also, but what I say is that I love, I can open a fridge, look at what's in there, and make amazing food. So that's my kind of way of being creative, I guess. But right, some people have to follow cookbooks, go to the store, do 2 hours of shopping, and make exactly the perfect meal, and that's fantastic. But I think my superpower is I open the fridge and I can whip something pretty amazing out from it. And I think that extends to a lot of my other skills. So it's not just so given the constraints, making the most out of it is something that I think I'm pretty good at. And I would call myself having a superpower. And I think, so that's
100%. That's a superpower. I'm so curious. What's your like signature dish?
Oh, I don't have a signature dish because the fridge is different every time.
Oh my goodness. I love that. Keeping everyone on their toes in the family. That's so great. That's so great. Well, really, thank you so much for joining today and taking some time. I know that you have a lot, you know, of going on, and it's so nice to be able to hear from you and to have a chance for you to share to the world just, you know, what you're doing and how you're helping our kids, you know. So
thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was great. Awesome, Fumiko. Well, thanks again. And for those of you watching, thanks for joining us. Have a wonderful evening. And I'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.